Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 8BitDo arcade stick and why I think it represents great design. You've probably already heard of or bought the 8BitDo arcade stick, so I'm not going to try and sell you on the bang for the buck, or whether or not it's worth your money. No, you probably already know if that's true. And if you don't, I don't know, go watch Wolf Den or someone else's review, because I promise they'll do a much better job fulfilling that need than this video will. Now, I'm making this video because I love the arcade stick. Why, you might ask? It's simple. I love the arcade stick because it is good design. Okay. What do I mean? Well, in my last video, I went over Ron's list of 10 rules for good design, so I won't go over it here again, but you can check that video out if you're interested. Instead, let's just jump right into taking a look at the arcade stick and see if it would qualify as good design to us. While Dieter's list implies that good design needs to have all of these things, I disagree. I think there's a lot to be learned and gained from letting our designs break from this formula. After all, just as in writing, nothing good ever comes from formulaic design. So, the aspects I will focus on in this video are those that I think the arcade stick shows particularly well, those being the first 4 on Dieter's list: innovative, useful, aesthetic, and something that makes the product understandable. The first point that Dieter makes is that a good design should be innovative. Now, he isn't particularly specific about what this means, but I think it's not outlandish to apply this point to 8BitDo's arcade stick. I think the arcade stick truly innovates today in its user-centric approach. Where other hardware attempts to remove all unnecessary details and usually, consequently, personality from their products, 8BitDo breaks the mold. The addition of multi-level button configuration and macro support, numerous stylistic choices, as well as unique, nostalgic material choices help the arcade stick to stand out in a sea of samey black and white controllers, all with essentially the exact same layout and function. Now, sure, some of these controllers have cool new features, like the PlayStation's touchpads, or active triggers, or the Switch's world-class haptic motors. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these products all feel essentially the same, and rather interchangeable. First-party options rarely, if ever, give you the option for customization. And if they do, it's usually relegated to 1 or 2 buttons, maybe if you're lucky. And even then, these elite controllers cost an arm and a leg for the addition of 1 or 2 buttons. Now, yes, I recognize that it isn't exactly fair to compare 8BitDo's arcade stick to a traditional game controller. But the same is true even in the enthusiast market of fight sticks and fight pads. Most options are either a simple black box with some controls you have to assemble yourself, or they're extremely expensive and complicated to obtain and set up. I think the most important thing that 8BitDo brings to the table is their manufacturing capacity. They're able to make a similar, if not better, product for less. And instead of pulling an Apple and pocketing the difference while raising the price, they pass that on to the customer, making it easier than ever to get into the niche, which is great for everyone because that prompts other companies to want to match their level of quality. as they see the demand rise. The next point I think 8BitDo crushes it on is making their product useful. This may seem like a pretty obvious point to make. Of course, a product should be useful. Why make it if it doesn't do anything? And that's a good point. But I think where the 8BitDo arcade stick targets its usefulness is particularly in the expandability and customizability aspect. And that's not particularly common on today's market. Most other controllers make it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to open up and play with their internals. The arcade stick, however, does a great job of making the internals accessible and easy to play with. The simple choice to require only 6 standard Phillips head screws to be removed makes opening up the arcade stick incredibly easy. On top of that, there's no requirement to remove the rubber feet or faff about with any clips to get the case open. It's a simple unscrew and open operation, which instantly puts it ahead of almost all other gaming hardware aside from some mechanical keyboards. Going forward, companies will have to adopt this kind of attitude if they want to be more successful, because the sentiment among users is quickly shifting to value repairability and modability. There is rarely a real reason that designers can't make their products easier to open and repair, other than top-level oversight and red tape. After all, as was made evident in minimalism, in design, we value the innovative and interesting route. And at this point, the more interesting and more difficult and more innovative route is figuring out how we can make our product more easy to repair and trusting our users with the products they buy. I'm going to combine the last 2 points, aesthetics and usability, into one because I think they inform each other a lot. When it comes to the aesthetics, a lot of people get tripped up in the subjectivity of it all. Where I want to focus on is the target audience of the arcade stick. While I wasn't able to find a stated target audience by 8BitDo, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that the retro and classic game fans are who 8BitDo was intending to reach with this product. The obvious calls to the NES in color palette, the inclusion of shadow lines, and a highly rectilinear design all shout 1980s Nintendo hardware design. And this is kind of the company's tour de force in the gaming peripheral space. Puzzlingly, not many large companies are willing to look back and take advantage of the nostalgia of older gamers. Now, game development companies do this all the time, but in the hardware space, it's much less common. But 8BitDo makes this their main focus, and while they do have plenty of offerings in a more modern styling, I think their main appeal is an unrestrained focus on and understanding of the classics of video game history. Now, getting back to design for a second, there is a sense when watching interviews with Dieter that usability and clarity in design is the main focus. It's the most important part for Dieter. In a lot of interviews, he talks about how the world is changing and moving towards a need for more simple and more understandable design. By this, he means that when you look at a design, you should know what it does and how to use it. The designers should take into account the cultural and societal background of their users in order to speak their language. This is something the arcade stick does masterfully. It looks back at the history of gaming and pulls from the visual design that has been codified by Nintendo and applied that to their own controller. The use of red buttons for actions, more understated black buttons for secondary actions, and simple forms which are functionally easier to manufacture, but also easier for the user to understand, all point to this. Let's take the joystick, for example. It's meant to be held, so the top ball spins freely as the stick is used, which isn't just an adherence to the Japanese joystick standard, but a deliberate choice as the arcade stick was aimed at fighting games, where many prefer the Japanese ball top option. And this preference is where the customizability comes into play, because if you, for whatever reason, prefer a different method of interaction, you're welcome and encouraged to open it up and switch out the joystick for something you're more comfortable with. And this has led to things like the Odin mod, adding a D-pad where the stick used to be. I think the focus on usability today is similar to that which Dieter focuses on. For example, his shelving and seating designs all feature and focus on user configuration and allowing the user to shift and play with the furniture to make it whatever configuration they want it to be. This same thing is evident in the arcade stick, and should be more evident in other designs going forward. Now, I can't talk about the arcade stick design and Dieter-ROMs without touching on why we're all designing in the first place. Most designers don't design in a vacuum. In this instance, that's to say that most designers today are designing to sell, and this brings up a whole plethora of potential issues. 8BitDo is not without fault in this regard. Oftentimes, in order for a company to hit a very low and accessible price, they need to employ less than savory manufacturing and sourcing means. I wasn't able to find any particular issues brought against 8BitDo in this regard, though this doesn't mean that none exist. Let me know in the comments if you know of something I missed. Given that the company is mainly based in China, and that is where they do their manufacturing, it's not impossible that they could be subject to these same compromises. That's not to say all products out of China are bad, or all American-made products are good, or anything like that. There's poor regulation around this kind of thing pretty much everywhere. This is merely to address that while I do love what this company is doing, they aren't some angel. They're a company, and they have every ability to be a bad one. However, from what I've seen and experienced personally, and take this for what it is, my own personal anecdotal evidence, they seem to do what they can to take a user-centric approach and really listen to what their users want, and try to deliver that to them the best way they can. Alright, after all that, let's try to summarize why I think the arcade stick is such a good design. The arcade stick is a great all-round piece of product design for three main reasons. It's simple where it needs to be, while still allowing for the user to squeeze an extensive number of functions out of it. It never compromises on what it lets the user do for the sake of aesthetics or profit. 2, it allows, and I would argue, actively encourages modification and play. Not only do 8BitDo's design team make it incredibly easy to open up, requiring only 6 Phillips head screws to open, they also made the ingeniously customer-friendly decision to label the soldering pads, making it trivial to modify to your heart's content. If you really wanted to, you could design and fabricate any housing you want and just drop in the original hardware. I think this is an amazing piece of design and by far the arcade stick's greatest strength. It harkens back to the days of the Atari or the Commodore 64, where you were actively encouraged to tinker and learn with your cool new piece of tech. And in today's increasingly vertically integrated world of hardware design, that is a callback that can't go unappreciated. Lastly, it understands its audience and masterfully transfers the design language of 1980s Nintendo like few, if any, other companies have managed to do. It's not a simple recreation of old Nintendo hardware, like so many before it. It's not just another N64 controller clone or anything like that. No, it's an evolution of the design, and a masterful one at that. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would really appreciate it if you considered giving it a like and clicking that subscribe button if you want more of this content, and if you have suggestions for future videos or topics you'd like me to cover, feel free to leave those in the comments section as well. But thank you so much for watching. I know you didn't have to. Have a good day, and happy gaming. This is cold. This is cold now.